Daniel Mercer had learned how to become invisible. Every morning, hundreds of people passed the old brick wall where he sat beneath the awning of a closed bookstore. They hurried toward offices, schools, cafes, and train stations. Some glanced at him and quickly looked away. Others tightened their grip on their bags or crossed the street before reaching him. Daniel never blamed them. At 48, he no longer looked like the man in the photograph he carried inside his coat. That man stood straight in a military uniform, with clear eyes and a confident smile. Beside him were 6 other soldiers, their arms resting across one another's shoulders beneath a burning desert sky. Only 2 of them had come home. The Daniel sitting against the bookstore wall wore a gray beard, a faded army jacket, and boots held together with black tape. His shoulders curved inward as if he were trying to occupy as little space as possible. A small cardboard sign rested beside him. It did not ask for money. It simply said, U.S. Army Veteran, looking for work. Most people never stopped long enough to read it. Daniel's days followed a careful routine. He woke before sunrise in the abandoned loading shed behind the train station. He washed his face in the public restroom, folded his blanket, and placed his few possessions into an old canvas backpack. Then he walked 3 blocks to the bookstore. The awning protected him from rain, and the morning sun reached the wall just after 9. Across the street stood Millbrook Elementary School. Daniel liked hearing the children arrive because their voices reminded him that the world still contained beginnings. He never approached them. He never wanted anyone to feel afraid. He simply listened to their laughter as they hurried through the gates. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, a yellow school bus stopped across the street. Children poured onto the sidewalk in bright coats, carrying backpacks and decorated lunchboxes. One little girl stepped down last. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 8 years old, small for her age, and wore her brown hair in 2 uneven braids. One of her front teeth was missing, and a purple backpack nearly covered her entire back. Emily usually walked straight into school with her best friend. That morning, however, she stopped. She had noticed Daniel. He was struggling to open a small container of yogurt with fingers stiff from the cold. When the foil finally tore, half the yogurt spilled across his glove. Several adults passed without reacting. Emily watched him look at the mess for a moment. Then he quietly placed the damaged container beside his backpack and wiped his glove against his trousers. "Emily, come on," her friend called. Emily did not move. A teacher standing at the school gate waved impatiently. "Girls, inside. The bell is about to ring." Emily finally followed her friend, but she looked back at Daniel until the gate closed behind her. Daniel never saw her. At lunchtime, Emily opened the blue lunchbox her father had prepared that morning. Inside were a turkey sandwich cut into 2 triangles, a red apple, a packet of crackers, and 2 homemade chocolate chip cookies. Her father always packed 2 cookies. One was for Emily, and the other, he said, was for someone who needed a better day. Usually Emily gave the second cookie to her best friend. That afternoon, she did not eat either of them. Instead, she studied the sandwich and remembered the way the yogurt had fallen from Daniel's hands. Then she tore a sheet from her notebook and began writing. Her teacher noticed. "Emily, lunch is almost over." "I know," Emily answered, folding the paper carefully. When the final bell rang, rain was falling over Millbrook. Parents gathered beneath umbrellas while school buses lined the curb. Emily's father had sent a message saying he would be 10 minutes late. She stood beneath the entrance canopy holding her lunchbox and watching the bookstore across the street. Daniel was still there. He had pulled a plastic sheet over his shoulders, but the wind kept blowing rain beneath the awning. Emily looked at the teachers, then at the crosswalk. When the light changed, she slipped away with a group of parents. Daniel heard light footsteps approaching and lifted his head. Emily stopped several feet away. Up close, Daniel seemed larger and more tired than she had imagined. A thin scar crossed the side of his face. "Hello," she said. Daniel immediately sat straighter. "Hello, young lady. You shouldn't be over here alone. My dad is coming. You should wait by the school." Emily placed the blue lunchbox beside his backpack. Daniel frowned. "You forgot something." "No, it's for you." Before he could respond, Emily turned and ran back toward the crosswalk. Halfway across, she looked over her shoulder. "Please read the note." Daniel raised one hand, but the girl had already disappeared beneath the school canopy. For several minutes, he did not touch the lunchbox. He was accustomed to adults offering him leftovers or coins. A few treated him kindly. Others photographed themselves helping him and walked away before he could learn their names. But no child had ever left him her lunch. Daniel finally opened the box. The sandwich was untouched. The apple had been polished until it shone. Beside the crackers were 2 cookies wrapped in a paper napkin. A folded note rested on top. Daniel opened it carefully. The handwriting was large and uneven. "Dear Mister, my name is Emily. My dad says soldiers protect people when they are scared. I saw your sign, so I think you protected people too. You looked hungry today. I didn't eat my lunch because I wanted you to have all of it. There are 2 cookies. Dad says the second one is for someone who needs a better day. Today that person is you. Please don't give up. My dad says one bad chapter does not mean the story is over. Thank you for being brave. Your friend, Emily." Beneath her name, she had drawn a soldier holding a flag. Next to him stood a little girl with 2 braids. Daniel read the note twice, then a third time. By the fourth, the words had blurred. He lowered his head and began to cry. For years, Daniel had believed he had nothing left to offer the world. He had survived an explosion that killed 3 members of his unit. He had returned home with a damaged knee, nightmares, and a guilt no doctor seemed able to reach. His wife had tried to help him. So had his younger brother. But Daniel pushed him away. He missed appointments. He lost jobs. He began drinking to silence the memories. Eventually, the drinking cost him his marriage, his apartment, and nearly every relationship he still had. The worst night came 2 years earlier when his brother Michael found him sleeping in his car. Michael had begged him to come home. Daniel refused. "If you leave now," Michael warned, "I don't know how to find you again." Daniel drove away anyway. The car broke down 3 weeks later. He had been on the streets ever since. He often told himself that everyone was better without him. The sentence became easier to believe each time another person looked through him. Then an 8-year-old girl had written that one bad chapter did not mean his story was over. Daniel pressed the note against his chest. Across the street, Emily saw him crying. Her father, Thomas Carter, had arrived and was kneeling beside her. "You crossed the street alone?" he asked, frightened and angry. "Emily, you know better." "I'm sorry," she said. But he was hungry. Thomas looked toward Daniel. He saw the blue lunchbox and the note in the veteran's hands. His expression softened, but he still held Emily by both shoulders. "You could have told the teacher. You could have waited for me. I thought if I waited, maybe he would leave." Thomas exhaled slowly. He had raised Emily alone since her mother died from cancer 3 years earlier. He tried to teach her compassion, but he also understood that compassion without caution could place a child in danger. "We help people," he said, "but we do it safely, together. Do you understand?" Emily nodded. Thomas took her hand and crossed the street. Daniel wiped his face when he saw them approaching. He closed the lunchbox and began to rise. "I'm sorry," he said. "She came over before I could send her back." "I know," Thomas replied. "She told me." Daniel handed him the lunchbox. "Thank you, but she should keep this." "It was a gift," Emily protested. "You can't get back a gift." Thomas almost smiled. Daniel looked down at the note. "Your daughter wrote this?" "She writes better notes than she does spelling tests." Emily frowned. "Dad." For the first time in months, Daniel laughed. The sound surprised him. Thomas noticed the cardboard sign beside the wall. "You're looking for work?" "I was," Daniel said. "Was?" Daniel looked toward the road. People don't hire someone without an address, or a clean shirt, or a way to explain the last 2 years. "What kind of work did you do?" "Diesel mechanic. Army motor transport first. Then 12 years at a civilian garage." Thomas stared at him. "What garage?" "Marshall Fleet Services. Over on East River Road." Thomas's expression changed. "You worked for Henry Marshall?" "Until he retired." Thomas extended his hand. "Thomas Carter. I manage regional operations for Miller Transportation." Daniel hesitated before shaking it. Miller Transportation operated nearly 100 school buses and delivery vehicles. Daniel knew the company well. Years earlier, Marshall Fleet Services had repaired several of its engines. Thomas removed a business card from his wallet. Our maintenance supervisor has been asking for another diesel mechanic for 3 months. Daniel studied the card without taking it. I appreciate it, he said, but you don't know me. No, Thomas replied, but Henry Marshall does. Daniel's eyes lifted. Thomas continued, if your story is true, he'll remember you. If it isn't, I'll know by tomorrow morning. Daniel finally accepted the card. Come to the depot at 9, Thomas said. This is not a promise of a job. It's a chance to have a conversation. Daniel stared at the address. He wanted to say yes, but fear rose inside him. Opportunities were dangerous. They created something to lose. What if I don't look ready for an interview? Thomas glanced at the taped boots and rain-soaked jacket. Then come looking exactly like you do now. That evening, Daniel sat inside the loading shed with Emily's note beneath the beam of a small flashlight. The unopened business card rested beside it. He imagined walking to the depot. Then he imagined turning away. At midnight, the memories returned. Burning metal, shouting soldiers, the smell of smoke. Daniel's hands began to shake. His breathing shortened. Usually he would reach for a bottle. That night, he reached for Emily's note. Please don't give up. Daniel read the sentence aloud until the panic passed. At 6 the next morning, he entered the train station restroom and washed carefully. He combed his beard with a broken plastic comb and cleaned his boots as well as he could. Then he walked 5 miles to Miller Transportation. He arrived 20 minutes early. Thomas was waiting at the gate. Beside him stood a white-haired man wearing a brown work coat. Daniel stopped. Henry Marshall approached slowly. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he pulled Daniel into an embrace. You stubborn fool, Henry whispered. We thought you were dead. Daniel's arms remained at his sides until the older man tightened his hold. Then Daniel hugged him back. Henry told Thomas everything. Daniel had once been the best mechanic in his garage. He was the man who stayed late to repair a family's car before Christmas and refused payment from a widow whose only vehicle had broken down. After Daniel began struggling, Henry tried to keep him employed. But Daniel disappeared shortly after the garage changed ownership. He doesn't need charity, Henry said. He needs a toolbox and somebody willing to let him remember who he is. Thomas led Daniel into the maintenance building. A school bus sat over an inspection pit. Its engine had been producing an intermittent knocking sound that 3 mechanics had failed to identify. Thomas folded his arms. Want to take a look? Daniel removed his jacket. For the first time in 2 years, he placed his hands on an engine. He listened. He checked the fuel system. Then he asked for a light and examined the mounting assembly. Nobody's finding the problem because it isn't inside the engine, he said. He pointed to a fractured bracket hidden behind a hose. Under load, the engine shifted just enough to produce the knocking sound. The maintenance supervisor stared at him. We've had that bus inspected 3 times. Daniel shrugged. Sometimes the loudest problem isn't where the damage is. Thomas thought the sentence sounded as though Daniel were speaking about more than an engine. By noon, Daniel had a temporary position. Thomas arranged for him to stay at a veterans transitional residence that worked with the company. Henry drove him there personally. The room was small. It had a narrow bed, a wooden desk, and a window overlooking a parking lot. To Daniel, it looked like a palace. He placed Emily's note inside the desk drawer. Then he changed his mind and taped it to the wall above his bed. Recovery was not immediate. Some nights Daniel still woke shouting. During his 2nd week, he nearly walked away after a sudden noise in the garage sent him into a panic. But this time, he told someone what had happened. The veteran's residence connected him with a counselor. Thomas adjusted his schedule so he could attend every appointment. Henry called him each Sunday. Slowly, Daniel began rebuilding a life he had once believed was beyond repair. 3 months later, Emily's class visited the transportation depot for a school safety program. She recognized Daniel before he recognized her. His beard was trimmed. His army jacket had been replaced by blue work clothes with his name stitched over the pocket. "Mr. Daniel," she shouted. She ran toward him, then remembered her father's warning and stopped a careful distance away. Daniel smiled. "You learn to wait for an adult. My teacher is right there." Her teacher waved. Daniel crouched, so they were eye to eye. "I have something for you." He removed the blue lunchbox from a locker. He had cleaned it and repaired the broken clasp. Inside were 2 chocolate chip cookies and a folded note. Emily opened it. "Dear Emily, you thought you were giving me lunch. You gave me another morning, then another one after that. Your father was right. One bad chapter did not mean my story was over. I just needed someone to remind me to turn the page. Thank you for seeing me when I had forgotten how to see myself. Your friend, Daniel." Emily read the note silently, then wrapped her arms around him. Daniel closed his eyes. Around them, mechanics, teachers, and children stood completely still. Thomas watched from the entrance with tears in his eyes. A year later, Daniel became the maintenance supervisor at Miller Transportation. He moved into a small apartment and reconnected with his brother Michael. Their first meeting was painful. Michael was angry, relieved, and afraid Daniel might disappear again. Daniel did not promise that everything would be easy. He promised only that he would no longer face it alone. On the wall of Daniel's new apartment hung his military photograph, his mechanic certification, and Emily's original note. The lunchbox remained in his locker at work. Every Friday, Daniel placed 2 cookies inside it. One was for him. The other was always reserved for someone who needed a better day. Because sometimes a life did not change through money, power, or a grand heroic act. Sometimes it changed because one person stopped long enough to notice another, and because a little girl believed that even the darkest story still deserved another chapter.